Is this the end of the Big Three era? We now know that Nikola Jokic doesn't need superstars to carry his team, or even Jalen Brunson. And if you insist and want to call Jamal Murray a superstar, and maybe qualify Julius Randle as at least a good enough partner for Brunson, they still don't have a clear number three. You see, the Big Three question is really worth asking, since not so long ago we can't imagine a championship team that is not built in this type of model. For context, since 2007, when the Big Three of Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Ray Allen were created, every championship team in the next few years basically built their roster that way. Kobe and twin towers of Pau Gasol and Andrew Bynum. We got LeBron's Heatles, and another set of Big Three when he returned to Cleveland in 2014, joining the All-Star MVP Kyrie Irving and once sixth-place finisher for season MVP Kevin Love. It would of course be a travesty if we will not count the highest winning percentage of the Big Three being Timmy, Tony, and Manu, and the original Big Three of Steph, Clay, and Draymond, and then that version with KD. Those were basically your NBA champions for a decade. But since then, Kawhi and Pascal Siakam have been more of a duo with a deep bench. The Lakers' bubble run was more of LeBron and AD asserting their dominance, plus a bunch of really good players. Of course, the Milwaukee Bucks, Giannis and Chris Middleton with a really good roster that had Drew Holiday and Brook Lopez. The Golden State Warriors' resurgence 2 years ago was built similarly, with the chemistry of Steph and Draymond and a well-built roster that had Andrew Wiggins, Klay Thompson, and Gary Payton Jr. Okay, I give up my stance and include the aforementioned defending champs that is built basically in a similar fashion. An all-time great talent with top-of-the-line sidekick, surrounded by a deep roster that supercharges that talent. You know what I'm talking about. But how did we arrive here? What happened to the Big Three archetype? Is Durant forever cursed? Will LeBron build a new Big Three? Let's get into it. To put it simply, I really believe this is the most important factor. The talent pool in the NBA just got so deep. So deep that the least impactful of the three stars is maybe just a tad more impactful than a really solid role player in the modern NBA. Again, not because stars today aren't that good, but really you just have a way deeper league of role players now than arguably at any point in history. To put in context just how talented the league has gotten, let's look at one aspect that's mostly the point of building a Big Three: scoring. Back in the 2013-14 NBA season, we only had 22 players who averaged 20 or more points per game. And remember Ryan Anderson? That stretch four guy in Houston who we thought was so revolutionary back then? Yep, that's basically your 22nd guy. I'm not trying to slam Ryan Anderson, but my point is that one of the league's highest scorers back then was basically a one-dimensional scorer. He was a great shooter in his position, but not necessarily someone you remember and watch his highlights because of his deep bag of scoring talent. That was in 2013, and in 2019, the number of 20-point scorers jumped to 37. Shocking enough, that number doesn't even include stars like Trae Young, Jamal Murray, and Jimmy Butler. It's worth mentioning that Brandon Ingram and Chris Middleton weren't there, and these players are top talents in the NBA. So how about the 2024 season? That number exploded all the way up to 57. I said all that to drive home the point that the NBA is just basically more talented than ever. To further underscore that, surprise, surprise, that 57 20-point scores do not even include stars like Domantas Sabonis or Bam Adebayo. Known scorers like Darius Garland, Nikola Vucevic, Jalen Williams. Heck, even James Harden didn't even make the list. Well, maybe that last part wasn't all that surprising. And you can counter that point with maybe the style of play, and of course with that, the sentiments of the officiating has loosened and the defense's resistance has been almost a non-factor in recent years. Or maybe you can accuse how teams utilize their players, which caused the uptick in scoring even for role players. And maybe some other variables, but that only further justifies the original point of this conversation. With the talent that our basketball landscape has right now, why have a Big Three that can score 72 points a night, when you can allocate your resources to a more versatile starting five that can give you almost 100 points a night? But let's break that point down further and go beyond the numbers. An important sub-conversation of this closing of the talent gap for at least the stars and top role players in this topic of chemistry and versatility Basically, the process of production. Does combining the powers of your big three optimize each other's strengths and, as importantly, cover up for their weaknesses? To drive home this point, let's look at the recent big threes that failed to have that prerequisite and just been downright embarrassing. Since we already touched on them, let's start with the 2024 Phoenix Suns. Remember those social media posts of Booker and Durant basically saying they will be unguardable? That might be true since theoretically the three of them can all score, dribble, and facilitate. Their lack of diversity, specifically in putting pressure at the rim and attacking the paint, has made them vulnerable and very much guardable, especially against the Wolves. You can blame Frank Vogel's creativity, but that may not even be enough if we look at how loose of a dribbler and shot creator their big three are. Beal has been a serious off-ball threat his entire career, but has never been a number one in a high-pressure situation. And though Devin Booker's numbers have relatively stayed the same for the past 5 to 6 years, there's no doubt that having Chris Paul for 3 years was his most impactful years. This might not be obvious to most, but he's at his best when he's putting pressure on the other team by scoring and not really running the entire offense. He's not a point guard, and he needs one. Similar to D-Book, almost the same can be said with Kevin Durant. This might even be the reason why, for all his talents, he has never been looked at as a heliocentric creator compared to the likes of LeBron and Luka. He may not even be at the level of Paul George and Kawhi. This is true even back to his Brooklyn Nets days. He has always been money in the mid-range and a guaranteed 25-point scorer on a nightly basis. But he has never been great as an offensive hub. This is partly how Boston eliminated that Brooklyn Nets team. You know what? Let's talk about that team next. While that team was never short on shot creation and overall offensive juice, to the tune of 136 points per 100 possessions with KD, Kyrie, and James Harden, that team was almost a zero on defense. Outside of Nick Claxton and Bruce Bowen, they almost got no sort of resistance. They were almost a supercharged version of the LeBron-led Cavs in the 2010s, at least offensively. But their collective deficiency in defense just left too much to cover. Next up, although not as legendary in terms of disappointment, another similar trio that needs to be mentioned when talking about failing to optimize each other's strengths and covering for each other's weaknesses is OKC Thunder's big three of Russell Westbrook, Paul George, and Melo. I mean, if you're supposedly a big three, yet you are effectively shut down by Ricky Rubio, Joe Ingles, and a rookie Donovan Mitchell, that should automatically be mentioned here, right? This team basically proves that accolades count less when accounting for actual on-court chemistry. But do you know what underlines that point even more? The 2022 Lakers big three of LeBron, AD, and one Russell Westbrook. Looking to replicate the magic of having a top-of-the-line point guard and one of the best power forwards, the Lakers added Russell Westbrook to AD and LeBron, who just won a championship. But instead of maximizing what worked so well in that championship run, the trade basically drained everything that powered that well-running engine. And though this next one had a contender's chance for quite a while, it's worth mentioning that the Lob City Clippers also belong to this list of disappointment. While not entirely a scrub in a specific area, their failure to hit that extra gear, especially against the best of the Western Conference from 2012 to 2017, underscores just how much Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, and DeAndre Jordan failed to gel in and push each other's best. We also have the cases of the aging and breaking big threes of the Lakers' Kobe, Dwight, and Steve Nash a year prior. We might look at it as an entirely different case, but come to think of it, health issues and a lack in chemistry are a big vulnerability against a very talented league. To further compound the complexity of building around a big three model, the NBA Collective Bargaining Agreement, especially its most recent version, the one that introduced the thresholds of first apron and second apron. To put it simply, these new developments in the CBA don't just limit team spending limit. It basically punishes team building approaches that don't care about the spending limit. For the most part, this is the Big Three model. Before the newest CBA and the one it succeeded, teams with three superstars still had some tools to somewhat sneak in some quality free agents, in the form of taxpayer mid-level exception, biannual exception, and rookie-scale contracts. But its new form, with how stars are paid in the NBA, the CBA strips almost all that away. making virtually any solid rotation player impossible to fit in the roster. This is mainly because the CBA is basically designed to keep a healthy, competitive ecosystem, and the Big Three is almost the antithesis of that. And this is on top of the challenge of getting superstars that have been almost exclusively available via trade. There will be another Big Three. Championships and dynasties over the 75-year history of the NBA have been dominated by a collection of stars. Some are probably just looming in plain sight, waiting for their turn. But what do you think? What team will that most likely be? Thank you for watching, and if you want to see more NBA content, just like and subscribe for more.